Extraterrestrial warlords looked at our vibrant blue oceans and lush green continents and laughed, calling Earth a soft cradle that bred only weaklings. To prove their absolute superiority, their elite vanguard demanded a surface landing to dictate our surrender. Unfortunately for them, they chose December, and they chose Alaska. Humanity held its collective breath as the alien armada blotted out the stars. For 6 months, the Vraxian Dominion had systematically dismantled the outer system mining colonies. First went the autonomous extraction rigs on Enceladus, followed swiftly by the orbital habitats around Mars. Earth's defense forces, heavily reliant on experimental Lockheed Martin railgun platforms and retrofitted United Nations spacecraft, were woefully outgunned. The Vraxians did not just conquer, they humiliated. Their vessels were massive, jagged monoliths of dark alloy, built to withstand the chaotic, magma-spewing environment of their homeworld, Vrax Prime. Inside the deep, underground bunkers of NORAD in Colorado, the mood was incredibly grim. Secretary of Defense Arthur Hayes stood at the center of the command floor, his eyes fixed on the massive digital displays tracking the Armada's descent into high Earth orbit. Beside him, lead UN negotiator Simon Croft adjusted his glasses, sweat beading on his forehead despite the bunker's heavy air conditioning. They were about to initiate the first direct visual communication with the Vraxian Fleet Master, a being known as Corlin. The main screen flickered, replacing the tactical map of the globe with the imposing visage of Fleet Master Corlin. The alien was a towering figure of hardened, calcified armor that looked like obsidian, with deep crimson eyes set into a harsh, angular face. His mandibles twitched in what the human linguistic software translated as a gesture of supreme condescension. Leaders of Earth. Corlin's voice boomed through the speakers, digitized and translated into flawless English by the Dominion's superior algorithms. I have observed your world for 3 of your planetary rotations. I have studied your history, your biology, and your climate. I am utterly underwhelmed. Simon Croft leaned closer to the microphone. Fleet Master Corlin, we are prepared to discuss terms of a ceasefire. We recognize the superiority of your orbital weaponry. However, a ground invasion will result in catastrophic losses for both sides. Corlin let out a sound that resembled grinding stones, a Vraxian laugh. Catastrophic losses? Do not flatter yourselves, human. You evolved on a paradise. A fragile terrarium of liquid water, gentle breezes, and stable tectonic plates. My species was forged in the great magma plains of Vrax, where the surface temperature boils the weak and the sky rains ash. Your planet is too soft. It has made your species weak, complacent, and uniquely unsuited for the rigors of true galactic warfare. General Hayes crossed his arms, his jaw set. With all due respect, Fleet Master, Earth has its own extremes. Do not mistake our stable orbit for a lack of bite. Do not attempt to deceive me with your pathetic posturing, Corlin sneered. We have scanned your biosphere. We see your vast unfrozen oceans. We see your green land masses. There is no true hardship here. You possess no natural armor, no thermal resistance plating on your skin. You are soft meat wrapped in cloth. To demonstrate the absolute futility of your resistance, I will not accept your surrender from orbit. I will bring my vanguard elite to your surface. We will plant the Dominion banner on your soil, and you will bow before us in person. Croft and Hayes exchanged a quick, tense glance. If you insist on a surface meeting, Croft said carefully, we can arrange a landing zone in the Mojave Desert, or perhaps an airstrip in Nevada. We have diplomatic facilities. I do not require your facilities, Corlin interrupted, his eyes flashing with irritation. I will not be guided to a heavily fortified trap of your choosing. I have already selected the coordinates. My tactical officers have identified a large, flat expanse in your northern hemisphere. The terrain appears smooth, covered in a white, crystalline sand. It is devoid of your major population centers, making it an ideal staging ground for my vanguard to assemble and for you to travel to us, unarmed, to sign the subjugation treaty. Hayes rapidly typed the alien coordinates into his console. The system processed the numbers, and a red crosshair appeared on the global map. It was positioned deep inside the Arctic Circle, specifically a desolate, wind-scoured plain near Prudhoe Bay, Alaska. Hayes blinked. He looked back up at the screen. Fleetmaster Corlon, those coordinates, that is northern Alaska. We are currently in late December. I strongly advise against landing there. It is not white sand. It is a frozen wasteland. Corlon's mandibles flared in anger. You dare lie to me? Our thermal scanners detected atmospheric anomalies, but water cannot exist as a solid across such a vast expanse without extreme tectonic failure. Your entire planet is a gentle garden. Do not invent mythical dangers to protect your pride. We will land at the designated coordinates in exactly 48 of your hours. Be there to surrender, or we will begin glassing your cities from orbit. The transmission cut out, leaving the NORAD command center in stunned silence. Croft looked at Hayes, his face pale. Arthur, did they just threaten to nuke us if we don't meet them in Alaska in the middle of winter? Hayes slowly began to smile, a dark, predatory grin spreading across his weathered face. Simon, their species evolved on a volcanic rock. Their ships are built to vent extreme heat, not retain it. They have never experienced a winter. They don't even know what snow is. Croft's eyes widened in realization. Good God, they think the Arctic is just a white desert. Get me Northern Command, Hayes barked, suddenly energized, turning to the communications officers. I want the 11th Airborne Division mobilized. Call up the Alaska Army National Guard. Get our heavy winter mechanized units loaded and moving to Prudhoe Bay. Tell them to pack extra thermal blankets, not for us, but for the prisoners we're about to take. For the next 2 days, the Earth scrambled not in fear, but in a strange, tense anticipation. Military cargo planes from Boeing and Lockheed Martin flew back-to-back sorties into the harsh Alaskan frontier. The weather forecast for Prudhoe Bay was brutal, even by human standards. An incoming polar vortex, sustained winds of 50 miles per hour, and a catastrophic temperature drop to negative 45 degrees Fahrenheit, pushing negative 70 with the wind chill. Humanity was going to meet its conquerors, and Earth itself was going to throw the first punch. The sprawling white plains of Prudhoe Bay were swallowed by a violent, howling blizzard. The sun had completely abandoned the sky, leaving the region in the perpetual twilight of the Alaskan winter. Through the blinding sheets of driven snow, General Arthur Hayes sat comfortably inside the command module of a heavily modified Oshkosh Defense armored command vehicle. The vehicle's internal heaters were humming perfectly, keeping the cabin at a balmy 70 degrees. Outside, arrayed in a loose perimeter, were 300 human soldiers of the elite Arctic Warfare Unit. They were heavily layered in specialized extreme cold weather gear, synthetic thermal layers, heavy down-filled parkas, insulated combat boots, and full-face balaclavas paired with heated tactical goggles. To a man, they were silent, professional, and entirely unbothered by the hellish conditions outside. They were native to this world. They knew the cold. Radar contact general, the communications officer said, his breath barely visible in the warm cabin, multiple massive signatures entering the lower atmosphere. They're coming down right on top of the beacon. Let them land, Hayes ordered, sipping from a thermos of steaming black coffee. Do not engage. Let the planet do the talking. Above the howling wind, a new sound emerged, a high-pitched, tearing shriek of alien engines. 5 colossal Vraxian dropships pierced the cloud cover. They were magnificent, terrifying vessels, constructed from heat-resistant alloys designed to withstand atmospheric entry and orbital plasma strikes. But as they descended into the polar vortex, something unexpected began to happen to them. The ships were designed with massive thermal vents to shed excess heat from their fusion cores. In the vacuum of space, or the blistering heat of their homeworld, this was highly efficient. But in the negative 45-degree atmosphere of an Alaskan blizzard, the vents began sucking in sub-zero air. The alien metal, unused to such rapid thermal contraction, groaned audibly. Loud metallic pops echoed across the tundra as microfractures formed along the hulls. The dropship slammed heavily into the permafrost, kicking up massive clouds of snow that immediately froze into ice crystals upon contact with their cooling hulls. Inside the lead ship, Fleetmaster Corlon stood proudly before the primary boarding ramp. Behind him stood 500 of his Vanguard elite. They were clad in the Dominion's finest combat armor, a sleek, dark material designed to reflect heat and circulate cooling fluids to keep the soldiers from boiling in their own sweat during combat. They carried plasma rifles capable of melting through tank armor. They were the ultimate conquerors. Prepare to disembark, Corlin commanded, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. We will show these soft, fragile humans the true meaning of dominion. The heavy locking mechanisms of the boarding ramp engaged. With a hiss of pressurized gas, the massive doors began to lower. The Vraxians expected the mild, perhaps slightly breezy conditions they had observed from orbit. They expected to march out onto a soft white beach and demand the humans kneel. Instead, the Arctic vortex screamed into the ship. It was not merely cold, it was a physical assault. The wind hit the Vanguard Elite like a solid wall of ice. The temperature inside the landing bay plummeted from a comfortable 100 degrees Fahrenheit to sub-zero in a matter of seconds. Corlin took a step forward, his boot crunching onto the snow-covered ramp. The moment his foot made contact, the freezing temperature began to aggressively drain the heat from his armor. Vraxian biology, lacking any internal mechanism for generating heat due to their volcanic evolution, relied entirely on external warmth. A sharp, agonizing pain shot up Corlin's leg. He gasped, opening his mouth to speak, and the moisture in his breath instantly crystallized, turning into a cloud of sparkling ice that blew back into his face. "Forward!" he tried to yell, but his vocal cords, paralyzed by the sudden, shocking inhalation of negative 45-degree air, produced only a weak, rasping click. His soldiers attempted to follow his order. They marched down the ramp, their heavy boots sinking into the deep snow. But within 20 paces, the catastrophic reality of their situation set in. The cooling fluids running through their sophisticated combat armor designed to prevent overheating began to freeze. The fluid turned viscous, then solid. Alien soldiers suddenly found their joints locking up. They pushed against their own suits, their synthetic muscles straining against the frozen hydraulics, but the ice was unyielding. A Vraxian heavy gunner raised his plasma rifle, intending to fire a warning shot into the sky to demonstrate their power. He pulled the trigger. The extreme cold had contracted the internal firing chamber. The plasma cell ignited, but the frozen barrel ruptured instantly, shattering the weapon into a dozen pieces and knocking the alien backward into a snowdrift. Panic, a completely foreign emotion to the Vanguard Elite, began to spread. They were shivering violently, a biological response they had never experienced and did not understand. Several soldiers collapsed, their internal temperatures dropping to critical levels. The vaunted conquerors of the stars were curling into fetal positions in the snow, desperately trying to conserve heat that was rapidly vanishing into the merciless Alaskan wind. From the warmth of his Oshkosh command vehicle, General Hayes watched the thermal imaging screens. The bright red signatures of the aliens were rapidly dimming to yellow, then to a sickly green. "Unbelievable," Croft whispered over the secure comms line. "They're freezing to death. They haven't even fired a shot." "Deploy the mechanized infantry," Hayes ordered calmly. "Form a perimeter. Have the medical teams ready with the thermal blankets. We're not going to let them die, but we are going to make them wait." The heavy doors of the human armored vehicles swung open. Out stepped the Earth soldiers. To the freezing, terrified Vraxians, the humans looked like absolute monsters. They walked smoothly through the deep snow, seemingly immune to the death wind that was tearing the aliens apart. The humans didn't slip. Their spiked boots gripped the ice perfectly. They didn't freeze. Their thick, insulated gear trapped their mammalian body heat. General Hayes stepped out of his vehicle, flanked by 4 towering soldiers carrying conventional kinetic assault rifles weapons that functioned flawlessly in the bitter cold. He walked across the tundra, the crunch of his boots sounding like thunder to the aliens. He approached Fleetmaster Corlin. The mighty alien warlord was on his knees, his arms wrapped around his shivering torso, ice forming on his mandibles and across his crimson eyes. His once imposing obsidian armor was coated in a thick layer of frost. Hayes looked down at him, his face completely obscured by his thermal mask and goggles. He reached up and slowly pulled down the balaclava, exposing his face to the freezing wind. He didn't flinch. "Welcome to Earth, Fleetmaster," Hayes said, his voice steady and calm, carrying over the howling wind. "We brought the treaties. Are you ready to sign?" Frost formed thick and heavy on the obsidian armor of the alien warlord. Fleetmaster Corlin, conqueror of 3 star systems, and terror of the Orion Cygnus arm, could not stop his mandibles from violently chattering. He looked up at General Arthur Hayes, trying to find some hint of mockery or cruelty in the human's eyes, but there was only cold, calculated professionalism. "Medical teams, deploy!" Hayes's voice cracked over the external loudspeakers of the Oshkosh defense vehicles. Get those 3M heavy-duty Mylar thermal blankets on them immediately. Use the portable General Dynamics atmospheric heaters. We need to raise their core temperatures, or we are going to have 500 dead diplomats on our hands. Human medics poured out of the armored personnel carriers. They were clad in white and gray camouflage, moving with practiced efficiency through the knee-deep snow. To the Vraxians, whose vision was blurring as their ocular fluids began to thicken, these humans looked like phantoms of the ice. The medics rushed from one fallen alien to the next, wrapping the massive, armored bodies in specialized reflective thermal sheets initially designed for high-altitude rescue operations on Mount Everest. Dr. Amelia Brooks, the chief medical officer for the Arctic deployment, dropped to her knees beside Subcommander Vielle, Corlin's second-in-command. The alien was curled into a tight ball, his dark armor completely frosted over. His core temp is dropping exponentially. Brooks shouted into her comms unit, pulling a high-grade thermal pack from her kit and cracking it to activate the chemical reaction. She shoved it into the gap between the alien's neck armor and his biological carapace. These creatures have zero internal thermoregulation. It's like they're cold-blooded, but worse. They rely entirely on their environment and their suits have completely failed. Two burly infantrymen grabbed Fleetmaster Corlin by the shoulders. His legs were completely locked, the hydraulic fluid in his knee joints having frozen solid. They half-carried, half-dragged the towering alien warlord toward the lead command vehicle. Corlin tried to resist, pride demanding he fight back, but his muscles were utterly unresponsive. He was a prisoner in his own freezing body. They hauled him into the back of the heavily modified command center. The heavy reinforced doors slammed shut, cutting off the deafening howl of the polar vortex. Instantly, the environment changed. The interior was heavily insulated and aggressively heated. The sudden influx of 70-degree air hit Corlin's frozen biology like a physical blow. Condensation immediately began to pour off his armor, forming small puddles on the steel floor grate. General Hayes stepped inside a moment later, pulling off his frosted balaclava and shaking the snow from his heavy parka. He walked over to a small field desk, poured a fresh cup of coffee from a stainless steel thermos, and sat down across from the shivering Fleetmaster. Simon Croft, the UN negotiator, sat beside Hayes, opening a durable Panasonic Toughbook laptop. "Welcome to the soft cradle, Fleetmaster," Croft said quietly, his tone devoid of gloating, though the absolute dominance of the situation was clear. "I believe we have a treaty to discuss." Corlin slumped on the heavy steel bench, his chest heaving as his internal temperature slowly began to rise. He looked around the cabin, his crimson eyes wide with a mixture of horror and profound confusion. "How?" he rasped, his vocal cords finally thawing enough to produce human speech through his translator. "How do you survive this? This is a death zone. The atmosphere itself is a weapon. Your planet is actively trying to extinguish life." Hayes took a slow sip of his black coffee. "Earth is a beautiful, vibrant world, Corlin, but she is also ruthless. You scanned our green continents and our liquid oceans and assumed we had it easy. You assumed our evolution was a gentle stroll through a paradise." The general leaned forward, his eyes locking onto the alien. "What your scans didn't tell you is that our planet operates on extremes. This death zone you are sitting in covers a massive portion of our globe for half the year. And this isn't even the coldest it gets. Down in Antarctica, the temperatures drop so low that carbon dioxide freezes out of the air." Corlin's mandibles twitched in disbelief. No species can evolve in such chaos without heavy biological plating or geothermal adaptation. "We didn't adapt biologically," Croft interjected, tapping the screen of his laptop. "We adapted intellectually. We survived multiple ice ages periods where glaciers, miles thick, covered entire continents. We didn't have fusion cores or thermal armor back then. We survived using animal furs, fire, and sheer, stubborn willpower. We are an apex predator forged not by magma, but by ice, fire, storms, and floods." The realization hit Corlin like a kinetic strike. The Vraxian Dominion had conquered worlds by relying on their natural biological superiority and overwhelming firepower. They had never encountered a species that routinely, voluntarily inhabited environments that were actively lethal. "Your armor," Corlin wheezed, gesturing weakly to Hayes' parka. "It does not generate heat, it only traps it. You generate the heat yourselves. Mammalian biology. Dr. Brooks noted as she stepped into the cabin, wiping sweat from her brow. She had just finished stabilizing the last of the Vanguard elite outside. We burn calories to keep our internal furnaces running. We are walking, talking, thermal engines. And right now, we are the only reason your Vanguard hasn't shattered into a million frozen pieces. Hayes set his coffee down. So, let's talk terms. You demanded our unconditional surrender. You wanted us to bow in the snow. From where I'm sitting, your elite soldiers are currently wrapped in human-made thermal blankets, drinking human-made heated rations, and crying for their mothers. I think the terms of this negotiation have shifted. Corlin looked at the floor. The supreme arrogance that had fueled the Vraxian campaign was gone, replaced by the chilling reality of Earth's true nature. If I do not report back to the fleet in orbit, Corlin said slowly, they will assume a trap. They will begin the orbital bombardment. Let them try, Hayes countered, a grim smile playing on his lips. Because the moment they fire, they expose their thermal vents. And if they enter our atmosphere to ensure targeting accuracy, the cold will do to their dreadnoughts exactly what it did to your dropships. Your fleet is paralyzed, Corlin. Now, you are going to open a direct channel to your flagship. You are going to tell them exactly what happened here. High above the churning atmosphere of Earth, the Vraxian dreadnought Ignis hung in the silent vacuum of space. The massive command deck was a hive of tense activity. Sub-Admiral Axalar paced the command bridge, his heavy metallic boots clanking against the heated grates of the floor. The ambient temperature on the bridge was a blistering 110 degrees Fahrenheit, a comfortable resting state for the volcanic species. Still no telemetry from the Vanguard, the chief communications officer reported, his talons rapidly dancing across the obsidian control consoles. Their atmospheric entry was nominal, but upon touchdown, all thermal signatures flatlined. It is as if they were swallowed by a localized entropy field. Zalar stopped pacing, his crimson eyes narrowing as he glared at the holographic projection of the blue and white planet below. An entropy field? Nonsense. The humans do not possess such technology. They rely on primitive kinetic weapons and crude fission reactions. Run the scans again. Focus on the landing coordinates. Scanning now, Sub-Admiral, the tactical officer replied. A moment later, a complex web of data populated the main screen. Atmospheric conditions at the landing site are anomalous. The local temperature is currently registering at 230 degrees below our biological baseline. The wind velocity is sufficient to strip thermal plating. Zalar stared at the data, his mind struggling to comprehend the numbers. 230 degrees below? That is impossible. Liquid water covers 70% of this planet. Such temperatures would freeze the oceans solid. Only the polar regions exhibit these extremes, Sub-Admiral, the science officer interjected, his voice trembling slightly. The planet possesses a highly unstable axial tilt and chaotic atmospheric currents. It is a world of fractured, violent biomes. The humans. They deliberately lured the Fleet Master into a frozen wasteland. Before Zalar could process the sheer tactical audacity of the humans, the main communication array flared to life. Incoming transmission, the communications officer announced. It is a localized signal originating from the human surface forces, utilizing a heavily encrypted channel bounced off multiple primitive satellites. The signature matches a human corporation known as Lockheed Martin. Put it on screen, Zalar barked. The massive holographic display shifted, replacing the planetary map with the interior of a brightly lit utilitarian room. Sitting at a metal desk was a human, clad in heavy fabric layers. Beside him sat Fleet Master Corlin. A collective gasp echoed across the Vraxian command deck. The Fleet Master was stripped of his outer combat armor. He was wrapped in strange, silver-reflective sheets, and a human medical device was strapped to his chest, pumping warm fluids into his circulatory system. Corlin looked diminished, broken, and shivering. Sub-Admiral Zalar. Corlin's voice echoed through the bridge, sounding weak and raspy. I am transmitting this message under my own authority. You are to stand down all weapon systems immediately. Cancel the orbital bombardment protocols. Zalar slammed his fist onto the console. Fleet Master! What have they done to you? Have they employed biological weapons? Neurotoxins? No, Corlin replied heavily, closing his eyes. They employed the weather. The environment at these coordinates is lethal to our biology. The Vanguard elite was neutralized in less than 5 minutes without a single kinetic shot being fired. our armor locked up. Our weapons shattered. The humans, they walked through the freezing death as if it were a mild breeze. They saved us from freezing to death using their own emergency equipment. The human sitting next to Corlin leaned forward. The translation software identified him as General Arthur Hayes. Sub-Admiral, Hayes spoke, his voice projecting utter confidence. Your ground forces are entirely in our custody. Your dropships are currently microfracturing in the negative 70-degree wind chill. If you attempt an atmospheric rescue, your ships will suffer catastrophic thermal shock. If you attempt an orbital strike, our Space Force, utilizing kinetic railgun platforms provided by Raytheon and Boeing, will intercept your ordnance. You are outmatched, outstrategized, and entirely out of your element. Zalar bared his mandibles in a vicious snarl. You bluff, human. We can glass your entire continent from orbit. Your primitive railguns cannot stop a concentrated plasma barrage. Perhaps, Hayes replied coolly, but we've tracked your fleet's thermal signatures. Your ships run incredibly hot. To fire a concentrated barrage, you must open your primary heat sinks. If you do that in low Earth orbit, the residual atmospheric drag and our localized defense grids will target those vents. You might take out a city, but we will cripple your entire fleet. Is it worth losing the pride of the Dominion to an ape in a snowstorm? Zalar hesitated. The tactical displays confirmed the human's assessment. The Vraxian ships were designed to fight in deep space or above scorching worlds. Operating in the delicate, temperature-sensitive threshold of Earth's upper atmosphere while trying to vent massive amounts of plasma heat was incredibly risky. Furthermore, Croft, the UN negotiator, leaned into the camera frame. We have the Fleet Master and 500 of your most elite warriors. Earth is prepared to offer a cessation of hostilities. We will return your soldiers, thawed and alive. In exchange, the Vraxian Dominion will withdraw from the Sol system entirely and sign a treaty of non-aggression. If you refuse, we will leave the Vanguard out in the snow and we will broadcast their frozen demise to every species in the Orion Cygnus arm. Zalar looked at Corlin. The Fleet Master gave a slow, defeated nod. The mighty Vraxian military, a force that had shattered planetary defense grids and enslaved entire species, had been brought to its knees by frozen water and wind. We. Zalar forced the words out, the humiliation burning hotter than his homeworld's magma fields. We accept your terms. The fleet will hold position and await the transfer of our personnel. We will withdraw. The screen went black, cutting the transmission. Silence reigned on the command deck of the Ignis. The galactic paradigm had just violently shifted. Humanity had not won through superior lasers or impenetrable shields. They had won because they were the chaotic children of a brutal, unforgiving world. The aliens had mocked Earth as a soft cradle, but they had learned a devastating lesson. Earth was not a cradle. It was a crucible. Blizzards continued to batter the Alaskan coastline as the logistical nightmare of the prisoner transfer began. Moving 500 incapacitated, heavily armored alien warriors through a negative 50-degree wind chill required a masterclass in human engineering and brute force. General Arthur Hayes watched from the command center as massive, winterized Caterpillar D-11 bulldozers and specialized Oshkosh transport trucks rolled across the frozen tundra, cutting paths through the deep snowdrifts. The United States Air Force deployed heavy-lift Sikorsky CH 5-3K King Stallion helicopters, their massive rotors violently whipping the snow into blinding vortexes as they hovered above the extraction zones. The roaring engines of human machinery echoed like a victory chant against the howling wind. Inside the makeshift medical tents constructed using advanced dual-layer synthetic canvas and heated by Industrial General Electric portable furnaces, the Vraxian Vanguard elite experienced the slow, humiliating process of thawing out. Doctor Amelia Brooks walked the aisles between the heavy cots, checking the vitals of the extraterrestrial soldiers. They had shed their obsidian combat armor, revealing their true forms. Towering, insectoid reptilian hybrids with thick, ash-colored carapaces. Despite their terrifying appearance, they huddled under heavy synthetic down blankets, clutching standard-issue military thermal flasks filled with hot, sugary tea. Sub-Commander Vielle watched Dr. Brooks approach, his crimson eyes tracking her every movement. He had been taught that humans were soft, fragile sacks of water who panicked at the slightest discomfort. Yet, this female human was calmly walking through an environment that had nearly killed his entire battalion, wearing nothing but a specialized North Face heavy parka and a confident expression. "Your core temperature is stabilizing, Sub-Commander," Brooke said, reading the output on her handheld medical tablet. "Your biological fluids have fully returned to a liquid state. You should regain full motor function within the hour. However, your joints will experience severe micro-tearing if you exert yourselves too quickly." Vale chittered, his mandibles clicking slowly. "You do not fear us. We came to enslave your species, burn your cities, and claim your resources. Yet you pour warm fluids down our throats and monitor our internal heat. Why do you not let us perish in the ice?" "We are professionals," Brooks replied evenly, checking the IV line that was feeding warm saline into his arm. "On Earth, the cold is a far greater enemy than any army. We don't let people freeze to death if we can help it. Even invaders. Besides, dead prisoners don't sign treaties, and a frozen corpse doesn't tell a very convincing story to the rest of the galaxy." Outside, the Vraxian dropships remained entombed in the ice. The catastrophic thermal shock had completely compromised their hulls. They were useless husks of frozen metal, rapidly becoming permanent monuments to alien arrogance. To extract the prisoners, the Vraxian dreadnought Ignis had to deploy heavily modified orbital shuttles, retrofitted on the fly with improvised thermal shielding. Sub-Admiral Zalar had swallowed his immense pride and accepted human technical schematics, transmitted via secure channels from NASA engineers in Houston to ensure the shuttles wouldn't shatter upon entering the polar vortex. Within the Oshkosh command vehicle, Fleetmaster Corlin prepared to sign the historic document. Simon Croft pushed the heavy parchment across the steel table, along with a high-end Mont Blanc fountain pen. The treaty was uncompromising. The Vraxian Dominion would immediately vacate the Sol system, dismantle their mining outposts on the outer planets, and publicly recognize Earth as a sovereign, restricted territory. Corlin stared at the document. He picked up the pen, his massive, clawed hand dwarfing the delicate human instrument. "My species has never signed a surrender," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "We have never been defeated in open combat." "There is a first time for everything," General Hayes replied, leaning casually against the reinforced bulkheads. "Consider it a lesson in planetary humility. You judged a book by its cover. You saw our blue oceans, our green forests, and thought we were weak. You forgot that water, when angry, can crush steel, and when frozen, can stop a galactic armada dead in its tracks." Corlin carefully signed his name in a jagged, aggressive script. He pushed the paper back to Croft. "The Galactic Council will not believe this. They will say the Dominion grew tired of your system, or that the mineral resources were not worth the fuel expenditure." "Let them spin whatever diplomatic lies they want," Hayes said, a hard, unyielding edge to his voice. "We have the telemetry. We have the high-definition recordings of your elite vanguard shivering in the snow, relying on human charity to survive a winter afternoon. We will broadcast it to every sector in the Orion Cygnus arm. The galaxy will know exactly what happens when you land on Earth uninvited. Your aura of invincibility is broken." 2 hours later, the retrofitted Vraxian shuttles descended through the brutal blizzard. They landed carefully, their engines whining in protest against the biting cold venting exhaust that instantly turned to heavy ice fog. The transfer was orderly, silent, and deeply humiliating for the aliens. The Vanguard elite, once the terror of the cosmos, shuffled up the boarding ramps wrapped in gray human-made blankets, carrying their thermoses. They looked back at the human soldiers, standing tall in the snow, their kinetic rifles slung casually over their shoulders. The humans didn't cheer, jeer, or mock them. They simply stood there, absolute masters of their frozen domain, silently watching the invaders retreat. Corlin was the last to board. He turned at the top of the ramp, the freezing wind tearing at his cape, and locked eyes with Hayes. The alien warlord gave a slow, deliberate salute, a gesture of genuine, hard-earned respect for a species that had weaponized their own hostile biosphere. Hayes returned the salute, Chris reply, his breath pluming thick in the freezing air. The shuttles blasted off, violently breaking through the atmosphere and docking with the Ignis. Within minutes, the massive Vraxian fleet engaged their faster-than-light drives, tearing holes in the fabric of space as they fled the Sol system in absolute defeat. They left behind a few frozen dropships, a massive pile of discarded thermal blankets, and a profound realization that would forever alter the balance of power across the stars. Earth was not a soft cradle. It was a brutal, beautiful crucible that forged the most resilient, terrifyingly adaptable creatures in the known universe. Humanity had not just defended their home. They had proven that the universe's ultimate apex predator was a mammal born of ice, fire, and unyielding defiance. The stars belonged to those who could survive the storm. Thank you for experiencing this epic sci-fi HFY journey. If you loved seeing humanity use Earth's brutal winter to defeat an arrogant alien armada, please hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends who love science fiction stories where humans absolutely dominate. We upload thrilling new tales every week. Leave a comment below telling us which Earth environment you would use to trap an alien invasion next.
Hi, my name is Tran Trung, the owner and manager of Palace Truths. After watching the video, Your Planet is Too Soft, the aliens mocked, then they landed on Earth during winter _HFY, I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? For me, the strongest feeling was quiet satisfaction. It's always interesting to see confidence challenged by reality, especially when patience and adaptability matter more than raw power. This story reminded me that judging others too quickly can lead to surprising mistakes, and sometimes the greatest strength is simply knowing how to thrive where you are. Which moment stood out to you the most? The aliens' first encounter with Earth's winter, or the calm way humanity handled the situation? If you were in that position, what part of Earth's environment do you think would be the biggest surprise for an unfamiliar visitor? One small lesson we can take into everyday life is to stay humble and never underestimate people or situations we don't fully understand. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy HFY adventures like this, feel free to like the video or subscribe to Palace Truths for more stories.